Hello, this is Tony from GreatIdeaz, and in this video I'm going to demonstrate how to move functionality that you have been developing in your dev environment into your QA and production environments. So first of all, I have been working on some functionality for my client GreatIdeaz, and I'm going to select that functionality. Now, one thing about functionality is that functionality may also contain some embedded T-SQL and is also going to want to generate some views and stored procedures. So the first thing that we're going to want to do as we migrate this information is we're going to actually want to generate a SQL migration script as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my command bar and I'm going to select the Generate SQL option. And what this will do in the back end is it will actually create a new SQL script and attach it to the bottom of my attachments here. So you can see the last time I did SQL generation was the November the 11th. And what I'm waiting for now is for the SQL generation script for November 26th to arrive. I can click the refresh button and here it is. So what I want to do now is I want to open up this script, and as you can see it's a file I can download. I'm going to download that script into my SQL Server, and as you can see my SQL Management Studio now has a new script in there that basically contains all of the information that I need to generate my code for my client GreatIdeaz. So the first thing I'm going to want to do is execute this script on my dev environment. So I would basically be going through this step on my dev environment every time I change my data model, but it's always a good practice just to make sure that your script is going to execute successfully. And depending on the size of your functionality, this may take 1 or 2 minutes to actually execute correctly. So what I'm now going to do is I've validated the syntax is good. I'm just going to tell it to actually execute the query. So once I've tested my SQL generation script, the next thing to do is I actually want to go back to my functionality. And then here, I'm going to go and export the XML definition for this entire functionality. So when I click export here, it's going to export as XML everything inside the client GreatIdeaz. And it's going to copy that into a local file on my computer. And depending again on the size of the functionality, this may take a minute or two to run. Okay, you can see it's executed correctly. I know that this is the XML file I want, so I'm going to tell it I want to keep it. And then here, if I go into my downloads directory, I can see my file has turned up here. Now, obviously, this GUID isn't really very useful, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to rename this GUID as GreatIdeaz, and personally, I like to version them so I know which date I actually extracted the file. So this was extracted on the 11th of November, 2021. Okay, so this is my XML definition of everything in this functionality. That includes all of the forms, all of the T-SQL, everything that was in that XML, sorry, everything that was in that record has been placed into this XML. So now then, let's move this into my QA environment. So what I'm going to do is I'm now going to sign into my QA environment. And now I want to import this functionality into my QA environment. So the way I do that is I go into the parent of where I want to load it. So in this particular case, I want to go to my UX creator because my UX creator is the parent of the GreatIdeaz functionality. So once I'm on the parent, I go here and I go import child. Now what import child wants me to do is choose a file. And in this particular case, the file I need to choose is my GreatIdeaz XML that I downloaded a minute ago. And what I want to do now is import this child into this database. So essentially what it's going to do is replace the existing old version of the client GreatIdeaz functionality with the version of the functionality from my dev environment. And again, depending upon the size of the functionality or the size of the file that we're importing, this might take anything from a few seconds to a few minutes. Okay, so at this point, the new functionality has been imported into my UX Creator in QA and has replaced the original version or the existing version of that functionality that was in QA at the time the import occurred. So at this point, I have now successfully copied any changes I made in dev into this functionality into my QA environment. So the next thing I'm going to want to do is apply any SQL changes into this environment as well. So if I go back to my SQL Server and I reselect my QA environment database and then execute this code again. So what I'm now doing is reapplying into the QA database the latest version of the generated SQL objects, so things like views, stored procedures, etc. so that my new functionality in the QA environment now has the appropriate SQL objects to make that functionality execute in the same way as it does in the dev environment. And again, this process is likely to take a couple of minutes depending upon the size of the information being imported. So let's go back to our website. Now, a couple of things that we do need to do once we've imported this new functionality and we've updated the T-SQL in the backend, the SQL Server objects. One thing that we should always do when we make changes to functionality is tell it to clear the application state. And this way, any of the changes that we made to the concepts and fields and the user experience will now clear out the existing caches and will be available to all users. The other thing that we should do when we migrate functionality across environments is tell it to refresh configuration lists. So configuration lists is basically a cached copy of all of the config lists and items that are inside any particular database. So for example, if we have a bunch of configuration sets and we have a bunch of configuration values in here and some of these values were changed, then we need to make sure that the caches of those values are also updated. So at this point, we have successfully migrated the functionality from our dev environment to our QA environment and updated any underlying SQL objects that are required to make this work. Obviously, the other thing that you would want to do, which we will cover off in a different video, is if you have a REST API associated with this functionality, you would also need to copy the latest version of the REST API from your dev to your QA environment. Okay, so now let's go through this process fairly quickly, and we're going to just do the migration now into our production environment. So what we will do is we will go and open up the production version of this environment. So here I'm now on my production website. I'm going to overwrite this GreatIdeaz functionality. So again, I go import child. I choose the file, and it should be the same file as I imported into QA, right? So one good development discipline is you modify the files in dev, you test them in QA, and then when you're satisfied that your testing QA works, then we push these files into production. So here is me picking my GreatIdeaz. Here is me then importing that as XML. And we will wait until the import is complete and this window closes. Okay, so once the import is complete, I can go to that functionality. And it doesn't really matter which way around we do this. We can either clear the state and refresh the config lists before or after we reapply the SQL changes. So it doesn't really matter which order you do this in. I would typically suggest that you're doing this inside a change window when you're doing something into production so that other users aren't actually in the system as well. And again, this script will take a couple of minutes to run. So just to recap, we started making changes to our user experience in our dev environment. Because we now want to migrate the changes to this specific functionality into QA and production, we went into the functionality and we selected the export. So we need to tell it which functionality or which object we want to export. That file is then exported into our downloads directory with a GUID on it. We want to rename that file. In this case, we renamed it to GreatIdeaz 2021-1126. And then we imported that file into the functionality repeat. And then we went back to our UX Creator application and we wanted to import our functionality into here. Note that we did not select this and import it. We imported it into the thing that contains this. Okay, so this is the parent that we're importing the child record into. So we went into here, we went to import the child, we selected from our downloads the file that we wanted to import, and then we clicked import child as XML. And that brought in all of the changes from our dev environment into QA. We then went into our functionality that we just overwritten and imported, and we cleared the application state to make sure that the changes are going to be visible to all of our users. And we refreshed the configuration lists to make sure that any changes to configuration lists are also visible to all of our users and ensure that the cache was cleaned out. And then the last thing that we needed to do was we needed to go and take our SQL and apply our SQL changes to our QA database. And then once we had done that process in QA, we repeated the process again with exactly the same files to make sure that the changes we took from dev and tested in QA are then the changes that are applied to production. Now note, this change to production does not take a long time. We're talking a few minutes, but it is important that you do it inside a controlled change window in production, because you are changing both the user experience and some underlying T-SQL at the same time. So you want to make sure that there is no point in this process where there is a mismatch between the UX and the underlying SQL that supports it. For the majority of users, they probably wouldn't notice, but you can be sure that somebody will. So it's always a good idea to get people out of the application whenever you're updating the production environment, even though it's only going to take a couple of minutes to do it. Okay, so hopefully this video has helped you understand how to migrate user experience and SQL objects between dev, QA, and production environments. And we've underscored the key steps in this process. And although you can do QA at any point, we always recommend changes into production are always done during a change window where you as the developer are the only person actually making changes in that environment at that time.
To learn more about GreatIdeaz products and solutions, visit GreatIdeaz.com. That's GreatIdeaz with a Z.com. Thanks.